My pleasure, though, to introduce you a lead pastor of a church in Melbourne, but also the prolific author of a number of books, including the Disappearing Church and the Reappearing Church. His latest book is called Platforms to Pillars, Trading the Burden of Performance for the Freedom of God's Presence. Mark, welcome to the program today. Thanks for your time.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Firstly, let's jump into the title and the definitions. What is a platform, as you describe it in the book?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's one of the, I guess, truest facts of the last couple of decades is how society has been rearranged around digital platforms. It affects everything that we do. We wake up and look at them on our phones, how our politics is done. Increasingly our whole sort of culture is being shaped around these ideas of these big tech platforms. So I was just fascinated at that change. It so affects us, yet few people talk about it. So in one sense, we're affected by digital platforms. But my argument in the book is that, we've not only, that influences our social life, but also it influences our identity.
Mm-hmm.
Increasingly, you talk about people getting influenced by having to build a platform.
Yeah.
You have people now who have more power than politicians because they've got a large media platform, social media, that they can do from their lounge room. So I really wanted to sort of capture that transition in culture and grasp what it meant for us.
So talking about platforms in the context of a digital media environment, what's the difficulty though with a platform mentality, not just the type of technology, but with the mentality that goes with that, Mark?
Mm. Yeah, so I trace the history back of like where do platforms come from, and if you go back and trace it back to ancient Greece, this idea that we have a stage that when you put someone on a stage, it gives them an extra sense of importance, that people listen to them. But what's interesting about digital platforms is that they give that stage to everyone. So people start to see life as a kind of performance, and that they should have attention paid to them. And we see this everywhere. We see an increase in individualism, but I sort of argue that I think the platform mentality is just hypercharged individualism. So people see other people as just serving them. It's less a community; it's more a platform, which our needs and wants and desire to be seen will be platformed.
In some ways, is it like rather than putting a person on a pedestal, we all get our own pedestal? And we're
Yes.
yelling at each other from our own pedestal rather than being on the same level and being on community.
Totally. And there's conversation and then there's sort of proclamation, so you can have two people having a conversation listening. It's like table tennis, it's going backwards and forwards,
Yeah.
versus two people just, projecting at each other.
With the platform comes influence and an influencer. Who would have thought that would be a viable career option a generation ago? But the not just the finances that come with it, but also the fame, the power, the influence that goes with what an influencer is. And as you say, this has not only been monetized, but now this is something which is dangled before a new generation of people is saying, and this could be yours too. This is very enticing for people who live in a digital world. Maybe I could be like that person that I see on this platform. I need that for me as well.
Yeah. And we see in a lot of the sort of polling done with younger people, being an influencer is now the most sort of sought after job going forward.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, it was being an astronaut or a sportsman or something,
Yeah.
And it's, part of the idea that I got grabbed me too was this. I read an American writer say that he spent time in Congress and in congressional subcommittees, and he began to realize that it changed, that no longer were people in politics, to serve or, like grow up to the top of a political party. They saw politics as a way of getting a large online following.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in subcommittees, they're having these sound bites to try and get like onto YouTube. And that changes everything, Instead of us serving institutions and making a better society, we want them to serve us.
That all becomes a megaphone for influence in that regard. I mean, how much do you feel that this has changed our society generally? What sort of influence has this had on our culture? Is this just a subgroup, or is this all of us? Mark, are we all in this platform world?
I think we're all in it now, and it really is global as well. It's all over the world, and I think it's radically changed our politics. I think one dynamic about platforms is that if you I said recently in an interview, if in this interview I just went crazy and started swearing and saying the most offensive things, it would, make 100-fold in terms of how many people watched it.
Yeah.
So sadly, in a sort of platform, influencer culture, the more shocking things are, the more that it spreads. So it pushes us to the extremes. And I think we're seeing that politically. We're seeing that in a sort of almost growth in violent language that's spilling over to violence in the real world. And so, I think it's having a detrimental effect. There's positives. It does elevate. There's a nuance here. These platforms can be used well, but also I do think it's pushing to extremes, where it's less conversation, less debate, more sort of rhetoric and anger.
And tragically, we've seen the outworking of that in the last 24 hours with the shooting of Charlie Kirk, somebody who was definitely an influencer and somebody who had built a platform. I suppose a very real-world example of where this sort of platform mentality leads to dark tragedy.
Yeah, and that's probably the one that's captured our attention in the English-speaking world. There's been ones in Mexico.
Yeah.
There's been others. This is becoming a real phenomenon of influencers being killed, and it shows you that how the rhetoric and it exacerbates, I guess, that sort of sense of tension in culture.
Something which you jump into in the book as well is a biblical metaphor for this, talking about the platform of sacrifice, a platform in the sense of an altar rather than something which exalts people, and the pattern of exodus and exile. Take us into that picture.
Yeah. So in the background of the book is the story of the Exodus from the scriptures, and again, I was trying to what are the origins of the story? And it's interesting, if you go right back, so you could argue the first platform imagined by humans was in the story of creation, as the Egyptians saw it, that this platform came out of the sea, and on that was a god-man called Pharaoh. So the whole of Egyptian society was built around platforming, one person, and the Israelites, as we encountered in scripture, are sort of slaves to that one man's sort of wants and desires. And in some ways, my argument is that we've been enslaved by the platform society. In a sense, it lifts us up, gives us a pedestal, but it's all to make other people money.
Yeah.
And you see this alternate sort of vision in the scriptures, where you see this journey towards the temple, and in the temple there's these, pillars, and going right to the end of the scriptures into the book of Revelation, this is an incredible line where it talks about us being pillars in the living temple of God. And that term really captured me. I've never thought of myself as a pillar. And pillars are very different. Like when someone passes away who's really contributed to their community, they're often described as a pillar of that community.
Yep.
They're celebrated because of how they actually enabled others to flourish. And you think pillars don't work alone. They work together. They support, they connect heaven and earth, and they create space for others to flourish. So my argument in the book is, sometimes there's ways we can use platforms, but we need to have a pillar mentality where we're living for others to flourish and creating space, and ultimately also creating space for the presence of God to flourish, which is what the pillar's job was in the temple.
And I suppose at its most basic level, a platform is something which elevates us, which builds us up. But as pillars, we elevate other people, that we are what elevates other people or other systems. We're not the ones that are exalted. We are those that are exalting others. Is that the essence of it?
100%. And you just that idea of creating space for others and beautiful things to flourish is really key. And I think cultures throughout history have known this. Elders are an important thing in lots of cultures, and honoring elders, that we live in a chain of pillars who come before us.
Yeah.
So I think there's a really rich and helpful metaphor which orientates how we should live in this time.
It seems basic at that level, but operationally, particularly as you say, we're living in a platform-orientated culture and society. It may be more difficult to go, hey, actually, is this a platform or a pillar? From within the culture, it's not as easy to go, okay, it's this or it's that, and I'm picking this side, particularly when the whole culture is echoing the opposite message.
Yeah. And that's what I think with the book, what I didn't want to do, and there's been some great books on like how you should, use your phone and, having digital fasts. And I think that stuff's really important.
Yeah.
But also what I wanted to do with the book is that the Internet of Things is taking over everything. Like
Hmm.
it's not going to be about putting your phone away because your refrigerator and your car will soon be basically part of the internet and collecting information all the time. So we're going to live in the internet
Yeah.
is where things are going and artificial intelligence. So for me, it's more a posture. How are we using these tools? Are we using these to benefit the kingdom of God? Are we using this to help others flourish? Or am I promoting myself? So, like I use digital platforms. I have a podcast, I use social media, but always asking that question of how am I using this? I think that's the essence of the issue.
Are you exalting an idea or other people, or is this just, hey, a platform so that you can sell books and have more people turn up to your church, right? The motivation is
100%.
is essential within this, but not advocating for people to go, okay, to be a pillar of community, throw out your phone, never go on social media. That you should be putting down your devices and picking up books and pen and paper. That's not what you're advocating here, right?
No, not at all. And seeing too, like how, God uses these devices. In fact, we're talking in two different countries here, having this conversation is an incredible thing. So I think it's more how we're using them and the postures of our heart.
Where do you think this is going? And permission to be a little bit optimistic on this one, because there's a lot of people going, "Oh gosh, isn't it terrible what's happening to society?" But an opportunity, I suppose, for people to decide, okay, this is the tech, this is what's happening culturally. Where is the God opportunity within this? How can we influence society in a godly direction rather than just seeing how many followers I get and how much I can monetize this?
Yeah. I think we are seeing a really interesting. I was just in Europe recently and really surprised in some very secular countries. In previous times I'd visited them, the church was very pessimistic of how there's a whole generation of young people who are exploring faith. And I heard stories in Scandinavia of people just turning up to church who had never met a Christian and had gone online, seen some videos, heard some great, explanations of the Christian gospel, and had engaged church. So for me, there is some real positives to this. I think in the midst of this, almost what social media is doing is creating a discontent.
Yeah.
But also there's others on there using it well who are answering that discontent. That's something that I guess I'm trying to do as well. So I see a real positivity in that, and I think there's also a sense in younger generation. I talk to my daughter and sons. There's an element that I think the younger generation are seeing some of the failings here,
Yeah.
and are wanting a bigger story. So I weirdly can because they're sort of dark times in some ways, but I actually see tremendous hope in this moment.
In some ways, circling back to the biblical metaphor, this is kind of like a "let my people go" moment, really, isn't it? That people
Yes.
are confronted by the oppression that comes from a platform society and saying, "You know what? We don't want to live this way. What other options are there?" Emerging from secularism, looking for hope.
Totally. And one of the fascinating things, I was in San Francisco again recently, and talking to people in Silicon Valley, they're seeing this. Like
Yeah.
there is spiritual movements happening at these tech companies where they're going, hang on, we've got to change this thing. At even artificial intelligence companies, they're like, believers at this moment have a responsibility to shape these tools in a godly direction. And I think Silicon Valley is seeing secularism's falling over. So weirdly, Silicon Valley is getting religious, and that's trickling down into the culture. So that's sort of a curveball I think many people didn't see,
Yeah.
but it's 100% happening.
Although my cynicism's kicking in about now, and wondering whether or not the platforms in Silicon Valley and people are going to go, hey, isn't this great? Let's follow the trend. Let's see how we can monetize this. Let's see if we can create a platform of the end of secularism that we can get people to subscribe to, right?
100%. And I think this is always the thing in the midst of these moments. When God moves, there's always sort of like, I often say it's almost like judo. Like the devil, wants like the church not to move. As soon as there's movement, he wants to take that energy and throw it in a wrong direction.
Yeah.
So I think you're 100% right. And maybe Christians who have been living through secularism in countries like ours, where we're used to the church being marginal, all of a sudden, you could see this like positive, like everything's positive, and even in that, we still need to have our discernment.
I think there's a particular burden for those people for whatever reason have a platform, that God has given them an opportunity, whether that's a platform, the leader of a church, or people that have social media influence, or people that write books, that if we have been given an opportunity to influence our culture, especially at the moment, given the other voices that are out there, to be able to take this megaphone and use it in a positive way, not just to say, hey, we're going to give up on this, but there's also some God opportunities in this, right?
Mm. And I think there's almost the sense that I've noticed with some people at the moment of almost, I'd call it a sort of retreat. I think the world is so overwhelming. The world is dark. It feels like. So there's a danger that Christians at this moment retreat. And we may not retreat into sort of like the sort of Christian enclaves we have of the past,
Yeah.
but it's not wanting to engage in these spaces. And so I think, I often think of, Daniel in Babylon. There's people that God has placed in these situations where you're asking the question all the time: am I using this rightly? Am I not? Am I compromising? How do I stay faithful? And I think being on that cutting edge is actually what drives a vibrant faith, because you can't assume anything. You're constantly praying. You're
Yeah.
constantly asking God to lead you. So I think when you have Christians engaged in those spaces, engaged in the world, having to ask those questions, it creates a real vibrancy and luminosity to faith.
And finding a platform that lifts up God, that lifts up our community, that gives an opportunity for other people to have voices, not just building ourselves up to the detriment of others. Now, this is such an important conversation. Mark, thank you so much for the energy and the intellect that you've put into this book. Did you have a particular audience in mind? Now, of course, pouring out what God has given you to say and the insights that he's given you, but what would you like to see change as a result of this book and people engaging with these ideas?
Yeah, I think I realized that everyone is living in this tech infused world. So I did have quite a broad audience, and to be completely honest, I knew I was sort of critiquing a little bit Silicon Valley and where tech was going. So I was expecting a backlash, and to my great surprise, it's been the opposite.
Wow.
It's actually been really positively received in those spaces. And actually, I've now encountered a whole bunch of Christians who are working in those spaces, and I've been encouraged how smartly they're thinking about it, how godly thinking going into it. So I'm really pleased that it's also being received in those places as well.
And hey, for people at least to recognize, to use a non-biblical metaphor, that perhaps the emperor is naked, so putting him on a pedestal is probably a very terrible idea. But for people that wanted to engage with this material, I mean, the book is available in hard copy and in digital form as well. But what's the best way of people being able to grab a copy, to start some conversations, to become more of a pillar than a follower of those on platforms?
Yeah, look, I think the book is, as they always say, available where all good Christian books are sold. So you can grab that everywhere. We also have, I think the heart behind it is, what I love with books is when people read. It's great I read lots of books by myself, but when people get together and read them in groups, connect with others, and I just encourage everyone, whatever sort of community groups you're in, if you're in church, in your local community, get engaged. Ask the question: how can I be a pillar in the places God's placed me? And it could just be your local school council. It could be, your neighborhood. It could be, whatever. And I think if we all did that, we're going to be in a much richer society.
Actually, just wanting to commend as well as the book. There's some wonderful study resource. There's some, go through chapter by chapter, asking some big questions and summarizing some of the ideas. So a wonderful thing to engage with within Christian community. And can I say, Mark, it was also a very useful resource in me preparing for this conversation today. So thank you for the work that you do. Encourage people to get the book. But thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.